Cool. And Scott?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Scott Diedenbach. I'm over in the U.S. in Michigan. I do the Bike Shop CX, Bike Shop Show, Crosshairs Radio podcasts. Work as a cyclocross mechanic, doing a lot of support there, and have a small shop that I run. And that's enough. That keeps me busy. So.
Cool. Awesome. Good to meet you.
Yeah, hi, Matt.
Welcome.
We've got Frank with us from Australia as well, which is awesome. But I was saying just before you came on, Matt, it's about 4 a.m. over there. So I reckon Frank's in bed or something, so he's not got his video on.
Oh, fair enough. Oh, my God. That's no excuse.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So what I'm going to do is just get you guys muted just for this bit, essentially for the lesson. So we're now going to have the lesson with Matt, and then with Q&A later on. So over to you, Matt. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, cool. Right, I'll just I'll try and make some sense of this screen. I can't get my screen bigger. I can't really see what you guys are seeing, so you might have to tell me.
I can see you in your nice workshop.
Can you see the bench there? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So I will crack on. In terms of the servicing that I was going to go through, the new Evo airspring service, which is actually pretty simple. And then I was going to go through the new fit damper servicing, so the RC2 damper, the RC4, so the Fit 4 damper is pretty much the same procedure. So I really only need to show you an RC4 rebleed. I won't be doing a full strip rebuild, because full strip rebuild, even for me to do it working as fast as I can on an RC2, is a good hour and a half's work, which is why it costs so much to service. But I can show you the refill, the bleed. I've got a load of Fox lubricants here that we use. So Fox 10 weight green, which I'm sure you've all used before, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. 10 weight red, which is the damper fluid that they use for their cartridge dampers and their rear shocks. There is also a 5 weight fluid now that they use for some of the other forks, and a 20 weight gold. With 20 weight gold being the one that we get asked most about in the workshop by customers, because in the UK we find that this in cold conditions is too thick. It slows the fork down. Low speed sensitivity kind of disappears a little bit with this. It's so viscous. So actually in cold conditions, so during the winter months when we're servicing in our workshop, we actually use 10 weight green as lower leg lubricant. It's much thinner. The fork reacts a little bit faster. So certainly in cold conditions, I'd recommend using the 10 weight green as lower leg fluid, and then use the 20 weight in the summer months. I'm sure you all know service intervals is kind of, again, people ask us all the time, how often should I service my forks? It's like, well, always, all the time. If you're racing, racers will do it every other race or every race. So, the more you can service, you're not going to cause any problems by doing lots of service. So those are the lubricants that we're going to use. There's obviously float fluid as well. So we've got the float fluid pillows that I'm sure you'll be familiar with. That's still the right stuff for using on air springs. You do have to be slightly careful with how much of it you use, because it can get caught in the negative air chambers and fill the negative air chambers up, especially on the new Evo air cans on the rear shocks, but we'll go through that another time. We're looking at forks today. One thing that I would say, again, with 20 weight gold, is don't use it as an air spring lubricant. It tends to hydroplane straight past the seal, and you'll get all sorts of lubricant in your air spring. You'll get air in your lower leg. So try not to use that. It's not an air spring lubricant. So with Fox, it's slightly more complicated than other manufacturers in terms of what lubricant you use where. And like I say, the only difference that we have to the Fox, the actual Fox service instructions is the difference between 10 weight green and 20 weight gold in terms of the cold weather versus hot weather. So yeah, I thought I'd look at I've got Fox 36 here that we're going to have a look at. I'll pop the air spring out of this so you can all see. In terms of tooling, I mean, I've got a pretty decked out workshop here. I'll just kind of show you guys what I'm working with. So the workshop that I've got has got a hell of a lot of tools. We've got drawers and drawers full of stuff down here. I can't really show you actually. Drawers and drawers full of bits. I've got vacuum pump, which is kind of essential for rear shock stuff and any cartridge servicing. That costs a lot of money. We've got our nitrogen in here, so hopefully you can see that. That's actually goes behind the wall, so our nitrogen bottle behind the wall. Again, for rear shock servicing, that's quite important. We've got other specialist tools over here. We've got our hand dyno as well for rear shocks, so we can actually compress rear shocks and test them. So we've got quite a lot of specialist tools here, but for air spring servicing and for kind of basic damper servicing, you can pretty much do it all with most of the tools you'll have in your workshops. The air springs themselves, I'm not sure how many of you have seen the Fox air springs, but the basic old air springs were literally just a shaft with a piston on with a coil negative spring, which wasn't great and caused all sorts of problems for setups and things. If you were a slightly heavier rider, you'd find that the spring snaps. So now they've moved to a pneumatic negative spring with the new float air spring, which looks like this, and has got actually a piston seal head, and you have a negative air chamber in this section here. They've gone a step further with their new air spring. It's still a float air spring, which is Fox load optimized technology. It's always an acronym with Fox. So that's their acronym for the float. They've gone a step further with the Evol air spring in that they've increased the volume of the negative air spring, which we'll actually see in the Fox 36 that we've got here. Which, if you've ridden it, is absolutely amazing, absolutely wicked for. The other thing that they've done is they've introduced volume spacers to the NA2 air spring, which is the air spring we'll look at here. The NA air spring was only around for a year, which was kind of a crossover between the float and their Talus air spring, which, I mean, the old Talus, there's about 5 different versions of Talus now, which I haven't actually got. I've only got the Talus 4, but there's 5 versions of it now, all very different. Travel Adjust Linear Air Spring is what Talus stands for. Again, another acronym. They're really complicated to service. If you do have a Talus, the newest Talus, try not to take the top cap apart, but the rest of the air spring's pretty easy. Just unbolts, clean it, put it back together. You need shaft clamps and things, but I can show you that in a bit. But this old Talus was again quite complex to service, and the service centre Mojo actually that are now Silverfish in the UK, the Fox Service Centre. If you were to send them Talus parts, a lot of the time they would just take them apart, throw them away, put a new Talus assembly in for you. They wouldn't even put the man hours towards servicing them. They're that time consuming. And when you get these apart, they're absolutely, all over the bench. I don't know if I can get this one apart. No, that's still got the circle pin. I'll leave that one in. Anyway, so let's crack on with some proper servicing. Like I say, I've got 36 here, so we will pop this apart. It's pretty basic stuff. I'm sure you guys have seen all this before, but I'll just whip the lower legs off for you and we can take a look. Hopefully you can see all of that. Move that back a bit. There we go. So the adjusters actually, you might have found this on some Fox forks, the adjuster assembly itself, which I do have over here. So the adjuster assembly itself, which looks like that, the red adjuster goes on the end here. They snap really easily, and you might have noticed on the Fox 40 and on the Fox 36 they've actually put a cover over it. That's something that if we're doing any kind of Fox servicing in the workshop, especially Fox 32s, they don't come with this, and we actually offer an upgrade for customers for that. We find that pretty popular on the Fox 34 especially. You can actually order the foot nut and this cover part, and that goes straight onto a Fox 34 and stops that from snapping. People seem to like that. Seems to be on the 34. It's obviously built to a price point. They're quite an OE fork, and that's quite a nice little upgrade if you've got customers or anyone that wants something on their 34s to protect that adjuster. Cool, so I'll just take this adjuster off quickly. Oh, different. Just 2.5mm Allen key. I'm a bit of an Allen key geek. I do like an Allen key. I've started off with this Bond House set, which were great, but I switched to a Vera set, and they are amazing, absolutely awesome. They're slightly tapered, so that if you get any of these bolts where people have kind of mashed them, you can actually hammer the Allen key in, slightly tapered, so it will actually come apart again. So they're a really good investment, the Vera Allen keys. So that's off. We can take the foot nuts off now. 15mm foot nut on one side, 10mm on the other. Usually I would do this in a bike stand, but I thought it's probably easier to show you guys on the bench. So that's one foot nut off, and then 10mm. So that's off. Your crush washers will be destroyed at this point, so I'm sure if you've done lower leg servicing or any training with Sean, you'll know that you'll need to replace these crush washers. So we'll just pop that over there. So at this point, ideally, you need some Fox impact tools. These are available all over the place, really, but we sell these as well. If you need them, just give us a call. We have them in stock. There are two sizes. It's worth double checking that you're getting the right size. There also is a longer one for the new Fox 32 step cast, which is the foot nuts further inside as well. So just bear that in mind. But these just screw on to the lower leg, and we can impact those then. So they're quite a neat little tool, and without them you can just cause damage to the adjusters and things, so you do need those. Cool. So I'll just whip the lower legs off. These will be full of fluid, so bear with me whilst I just drain these 2 sets. So here we go. Cool. So I'll just clean this off. And they come as standard with 20 weight gold, which I said before is just a little bit too sticky, I find, this time of year. And we'll look at the air spring first. So we will just pop the pressure out. Always remember to do that. That's, yeah, you don't want stuff to go flying everywhere. One thing to mention before you do any kind of, if you take anything apart, it's worth recording settings. We've obviously got a suspension service sheet that's got boxes to record settings, current settings, any service parts, because you can get kind of, you don't want to send a customer's fault back with kind of different settings. They're not going to get a good feeling. You could have done the best service in the world, but then if you send it back with settings that aren't right, the fault's not going to feel right. So it's worth at this point just putting a shock pump on. We use a digital pump. It's quite nice to use. So just pop your pump on, record your settings, and then go from there really. But for now, I'm just going to release the air. I do it in stages. The reason I do it in stages, if you do it all in one, you don't give the air spring system enough time to regulate the negative air pressure out of the negative air spring and into the positive chamber where you can release it. So what you'll find is if you just push the valve down straight away, the air assembly will just disappear inside the fork. And what will happen there is you'll take the top cap off, undo the circlip and try and pull it out, and there's still pressure in there, and that will go pop, make a big noise. So you don't want to do that. You want to kind of do it in stages, if you can. This is going to now do exactly what I said it'd do. So that has actually done exactly what I said you shouldn't do. We'll see how it goes. So at this point, you can actually take the top cap off. You want to use ground off socket. I'm sure Sean has shown you these before. Just a socket with the chamfer taken off. You can buy these ready-made. I think various companies do them now. Unior do quite a good suspension toolkit, which is kind of got everything. I think Pedros do these, and Park also do some sawn-off ones now. But any socket that you can get on a lathe, get an engineering company to take that down, that'll go a long way to helping you out. On these 36s, it's a 32 mil. So I'll just whip that off. Sorry if you can't hear me particularly well over here. The other thing I find is when you're taking these top caps off, let me just move that so you can actually see. I'll be able to see there. I don't know if you guys can see that. I can't really see what.
Yeah, that's good, Matt.
Yeah, can you see there?
Brilliant.
Yeah, cool. So one thing to note when you're taking top caps off, it's tempting to kind of lean on the tool and just keep going. But what you'll find is the tool will lift and then you'll slip and you'll take the edges off, which is made far, far worse on these new Evo top caps because they're anodized black. So make sure your stand is super tight and then hold the tool on the top and then impact the driver until it comes loose and then turn, rather than leaning on it with all your might, because you'll just round the top cap off. And again, that's not ideal. So we can take that off now. And this is where you can see the top cap, and you can see the fitting that it has here for volume spacers. And I'll show you the volume spacers here. So some of you may have seen the volume spacers, maybe not. But I will just show you those there. Hopefully you can see all those. that's our tray full of volume spacers. We do lots of tuning work, and the volume spacers just clip straight onto these, so you'll be able to see that there. You just literally clip that on, and then the volume spacer's on. Quite a personal kind of preference with volume spacers. There's a lot to talk about with those. I'm sure we'll cover it in another podcast or something like that at some point. So once top cap's off, set that to one side, and you can attach the rest of the fork. Cool. So at this point, you'll need a pick, and the new, not sure if you'll be able to see that in there, but the new release clip is actually it's got a much bigger recess. They used to be like a spring clip that you used to have to take off. They're now kind of I don't know what you would call them actually, but they're a different type of clip to the old Fox one. They're quite a bit nicer actually. They're nicer made. They're a bit more kind of positive in the way they clip in. So I'll just release that. Again, I would normally do this in a bike stand, and it's a bit tricky sometimes to get this out. Just get that. Oh no. Told you it was tricky. There we go. Third time lucky. So that's your release clip. Just about see that there. That will let us get to the negative air chamber. So we can pull that out. That just comes straight out of there. And that's it. That's your Evol air can. So just a slightly bigger volume than you would have had in your old float air spring system. These you can travel change. So if you've got a customer, or if you want to change your travel at all, it's as simple as buying another air assembly. You can see this one here is quite a bit shorter. So they go from I think 120 mil up to 180, but it is slightly complex in terms of which models do what, because you've got OE models and aftermarket models. The best way of finding out which fork can be travel changed, which can't, is to check the back of the lower leg. You'll be able to see that there, hopefully. There's an ID code. If you type that ID code into the Fox website, you will get a breakdown of all the technical documents, all the travel change options, all the air spring tuning options, and you can actually go ahead and just order the parts from your local supplier. The part codes are on there as well, which as a trade, as someone that's been in the trade a long time, when you phone up a supplier and give them a part code rather than a description, they go mad for it. So you'll get cookies at Christmas and stuff. So that's always a nice thing. Clean off the excess grease, and you can go on servicing this now. So the way that I take O-rings off, and especially with air springs, is you've got to be really careful here. So you can't just get a pick and start picking underneath it, because if you put even the smallest scratch on the seal head underneath behind this quad ring air spring seal, it'll leak. So you've got to get them really dry with your rag, maybe some alcohol spray as well, and then just try and pinch them and push them off with your finger, and then they'll come straight off. Hopefully you guys saw that. I'll try that again. Helps to do it in some paper. So if you pinch it up like that, hopefully you can see that, and then just push it off over the top. You don't really stress the O-ring. You don't put any scratches into the seal head, which is really important, and everything will come off a lot nicer. So in your service kit, if you've got a quad ring, it's worth replacing. Any static O-rings are kind of, you can replace them if you've got them, but it's not super essential. It's anything dynamic, so the O-ring inside of this seal head. To get to the dynamic O-ring in here, so when I say dynamic O-ring, I mean any O-ring or seal that's moving in operation, like the quad ring here, which has got 4 high points, which is why it's called a quad ring. And then the O-ring that's inside the seal head, which you would need to shaft clamp. So you'd simply shaft clamp that shaft and then undo the foot nut carrier on the end of the shaft. The seal head will come off and you can replace the O-ring from the inside. When you put the, I can show you some of those bits. When you put the seal head back in, you will need to use, sorry, I'm searching for tools now. You need to use a bullet tool, which I can't find right now. No, here we go. Cool. So I had to actually make this. So Fox don't make this part yet for the NA or NA2 air springs, and it's actually I don't know if you guys can see that clearly. That's basically a part of an air shaft that I cut and then machined on a lathe at a kind of 30-degree angle that tapers in. That I actually use on a wooden dowel that I stick inside the existing air tube, so that when I put the seal head back on, it leads the O-ring on to the shaft. Because if you put the O-ring, just try and get it straight onto a flat edge, a sharp edge on the spring tube, you can pinch the O-ring and then it'll leak. So unfortunately, when it comes to servicing like this, sometimes you've got to make tools. That is one that did take me a little while to figure out. It's quite a light bit of metal, but can be done if you've got a spare air shaft or something. I haven't seen Fox release one of these yet. They do it for their fit dampers and for the old rear shock dampers as well, lead-in tools. So seal head lead-in tools is what they would be called. So look out for those or make one of those. Once you've got the air spring assembly out, you've cleaned it, you can go ahead and clean the inside of the stanchion, which I'm sure you guys have done before. I've got just a bit of old PVC pipe there. That does the job just fine for kind of cleaning the inside of the stanchion. And the way that these guys swap air now between the positive and negative is through an air swap bump. The NA air spring used a shaft, a secondary shaft with an air swap bump in it, a bypass bump we call it. You guys won't be able to see this on camera, but trust me, there's a bump about here on the CSU on the inside, and that's what regulates the air pressure between the positive and negative. So you just need to check that that's clear, that it's not full of grease or full of crap. You can kind of feel it with your finger. No, that's absolutely fine. So just check that. The other thing I would check, especially on slightly older forks, is that there's no scratches on the inside of the steerer tube. Sometimes what you can get, especially with, oh, I hope you guys can see me there.
Yeah.
Battery's running out. I might have to switch to the iPad in a moment. The other thing you can get on older forks or forks that aren't quite as stiff as a 36 is you get some lateral flex in the fork as it's used, and the plastic seal head can put marks in the inside of the CSU, and that can create scratches, which creates leaking into the negative air. What you'll find there is the fork will stick down, so it will start to reduce travel as the air pressure just swaps to the negative. So if you're scratching your heads as to why everything's here, replace the seals, just make sure that you polish the inside of your stanchion, and then just hold it up to the light and just roll it around and check there's no scoring or scratching on the inside of the air spring leg, because it is honed to be totally perfect for the air spring to seal. So that's massively important. The other thing to be aware of with the new NA2 and the NA air spring is they don't use float fluid. You can't use float fluid on it. If you use float fluid, the float fluid will sit on top of the piston if you load it into the air spring, and the air pressure will actually swap it past the O-ring into the negative air chamber, and then that will fill up with float fluid and will start to top out, and you'll get an imbalance of positive and negative air pressure. So you need to use a grease. Fox haven't yet released a grease, which I have spoken to them about recently, and they wouldn't tell me actually what grease they use because they didn't know, the UK guys. So we actually use, for Fox, we use a Statoil grease, which I'll show you. So you may use other greases, like Slick Honey's pretty good, but this stuff is really, really good. That's Statoil CAH92. It's pretty expensive stuff, but really, really thin, really good quality, and works really well for the Fox air spring. So take a look at that. So rebuilding the air spring, you'd simply just pop some grease on. You don't need to be super neat, it's just a fork. Pop the air spring in. There's no special way of doing that, it's literally just slap it all together. They're actually really, really easy to service. You've just got to be a bit more aware of the different lubricants you've got to use now with the new springs. So just push the seal head in, get the clip in, just check that it's seated. I like to just pull the fork out, pull the spring shaft out, just to check that C-clip is definitely seated, because if it's not, and you load the fork with air, it's going to blow off. So you don't want that to happen. Top cap on, and tighten it down. Again, I'd normally do this in a bike stand. I'll just nip that up for now. That's absolutely fine. And then you are ready to go. Put your pressure back in. You will need to swap the air, so you'll need to get the fork to compress through its travel a couple of times to get to that air swap bump to regulate the air pressure. So we've had a few times actually where we've forgotten to do that and sent a fork back to a customer, and they've phoned us up and said, no, my fork's not working, there's something wrong with my fork, and it's literally just because we haven't swapped the air, which is quite frustrating. We've had to have the fork back, we're scratching our heads as to what's going on, and it's literally just because we haven't swapped the air before putting it in the box. So make sure you're doing that. I think that's it for the NA2 air spring. It's actually really simple. They've made everything a lot simpler. The travel change is really simple because it's just a whole air assembly that you replace in the shorter travel. As I said before, use the code on the back of the fork to determine what can and cannot be travel changed. Compared to the old float air springs where you used to have to kind of push these pins out and move a travel plate which was just horrible. It's such a better system now. It's much better. More kind of towards the kind of RockShox way of doing things, which I like. It's more modular, just nice and easy. Yeah, so they're really good. The damper then is, again, relatively easy to service, and definitely something that if you're a bike mechanic, you should be doing in store. If you're even an advanced home mechanic, damper service is not a difficult thing at all. This one is RC2, so rebound R, compression 2 adjusters C2. So if you ever see that with a fork, so if you see R2 C2, it's rebound, high speed, low speed, compression, high speed, low speed, so 2 of each. Sometimes you have R2C, which is a bit of a strange one, not to have high speed, low speed compression, but you do get that on some Mazzocchi forks. Again, record your clicks before we take everything apart. Top cap is pretty simple. That's just an Allen key out the top. Be careful of the detent balls in the top here. So I'll just take this one out. We can take a look at that. And what I'll do is I'll split the damper, and we will empty the damper and then refill it. Now you can hand bleed these, and I will show you guys that. Ideally, you need a vacuum pump to do this properly, which we've invested in. We've bought 2 of those. They're around $4,500 each. We've got one for Olin's and then another for everything else, because you can't contaminate the fluid for Olin's. Is a little bit complicated, but yeah, you can hand bleed these, and I will show you that tonight. So top cap off. Be careful of the detent balls. So there's tiny little balls and springs in here. You might be able to see that just about. I was quite lucky with that one. That stayed on there because of the grease. Normally that goes flying and ends up on your shoelace later on when you've been looking around the workshop for 20 minutes. But yeah, so just be wary of those. Where are we? I'll grab a magnet actually. There we go. So just use the magnet there just to get the detent balls and springs out. I'll just pick up that one as well, and I'll leave that there. That exposes the top cap. Hopefully you guys can see that there. And in the middle here, there's a really small, a really tiny little C-clip that we need to get out. So I will do that and I can show you the bleed, but I'll pull the damper out the fork first. So I'll just move you. So hopefully you guys can see there. So again, 32mm socket, much the same as we did with the air spring. Pop the socket on top, get yourself set up and prepared, and then impact the top cap. And then you're ready to pull the damper out. So there's our fit damper, which stands for Fox Isolated Technology. Just basically telling you that it's a cartridge damper, not an open bath damper or semi-open bath like you'll find in some older RockShox and Mazzocchi forks. Most forks now of a decent quality are kind of cartridge dampers, but with the Fox damper being one of the more kind of advanced dampers out there. So just clean that off. I'll move you back up here. So fit damper. So that's out. You can actually see well, hopefully you'll be able to see the bladder expanding and retracting there. Just about see it. This is the way that they deal with the displacement in the shock. So as you get, the problem is with a cartridge damper, if you get a high speed input into the shock, so if it's impacted really quickly, the fluid can't get out of the way quick enough. It has to have somewhere to go. So they have these compensators on top to allow the fluid to go somewhere to give you some displacement. Rear shocks do this with an IFP, so a floating piston. Like old rock shocks dampers did this with a spring and a piston. You've got to have somewhere for the fluid to go. And at the minute, that's nice and smooth. It's not making any noise, but that's perfectly bled. And that would have been bled by a machine. We're going to hand bleed it though. We'll see how it goes. Sometimes you have to hand bleed them 3 or 4 times to get it just right. But let's look at emptying this. So for this bit, you will need shaft clamps. You can use the top cap tool at this part to actually separate the bottom half of the damper from the top, but you've got to be really careful. I'd say you're better off with a proper shaft clamp. So we've got our shaft clamp here, and that's going to just go straight on. So hopefully I can show you the vise. Hopefully you can all see that. So shaft clamp straight in. Now just be careful with your shaft clamp. If you're having trouble getting the seal head out, heat is your friend in this situation. Fops love to use Loctite everywhere, so if you can get some heat into here, it makes a massive difference getting it out. The other tip I've got for shaft clamps is to use some fiber grip or carbon assembly paste in the shaft clamp itself. Just helps to reduce some of the torque, because it's all lightweight aluminium bits, and you do get kind of a feel for how far you can go on the vise, and sometimes you just need to get some heat in there. So bear that in mind in terms of a couple of tips, just to stop things from scoring and turning. Hopefully this fits. Oh, it doesn't fit. Right, so I'll have to figure that one out. But these are Nipex pliers, and they are parallel push pliers. So they don't actually hinge on a fulcrum, they actually move in a parallel plane. So the more you push on them, the harder they squeeze together, but in a parallel dimension, which is really cool. So that stops anything slipping. So if you're doing any kind of shaft clamp work, anything like these, you've got to have some Nipex pliers. So invest in those. They're about £70, but you've got to have them really for doing this kind of stuff. For this, we're going to need a cone spanner, however, would you believe? So I can't remember what size it is. There we go. So, humble cone spanner. Back that off. And I'll just grab a drip tray as well. Pop that under there. So, you can now unwind the seal head. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. And then that exposes the rebound damper just there. So you can see the glide ring. This would be part of your service kit. If you buy a full service kit, you'll get a fresh glide ring because they are perishable. You've got the seal head that moves on the shaft. Again, you do need a lead tool to get these on and off. So once you're at that stage, you can actually shaft clamp the damper, undo. You can undo either end actually. If you undo the adjuster end to replace the adjuster assembly that we showed you earlier, so that might make a bit more sense to you now. That assembly part screws into here on a fine thread. If you do undo this, there'll be a metering rod inside here, so a rod that actually pushes a needle up and down for the rebound. You've got to set that, so it can get quite complex if you take this end off, so try not to. If you're going to take any end off, take the rebound piston head end off. That's a much better way of getting the seal head off. It's quite draggy, this seal head, but it's a brand new fork, and this is actually where most of the stiction comes from in a fork, is in the damper. So that's something that when we do tuning at Plush, we actually size the bushing in here so that it runs super smooth. Get much better small bump. I mean, doesn't actually move when I hit it, so it's pretty draggy. That will get better as you ride it, of course, but at the moment it's not great, and that's out of the box. But it's maybe me just being fussy. So damper out. See the rest of the damper here. You just pour the fluid out pretty much. I'll pour that into our drip tray. That's completely empty. And what I was doing there is just squeezing this bladder part just to get rid of some of the excess kind of fluid in there. So that's all the old fluid out. So we can go ahead and kind of refill that now. I'm going to use 10 weight red in this. They do say in the manual to use their new 5 weight, of course. They've got another fluid for the new fit tune that they've got. If you actually look at there's something called CST, centiliter stroke. So if you actually look at the CST on the 5 weight versus the 10 weight, it's pretty much the same. They've just called it 5 weight now. I don't know why they've done that. It's really annoying. The 7.5 weight that they used to use is exactly the same as the 10 weight green as well. So that's something to bear in mind, is when you're looking at suspension weights, the advertised weight isn't actually a measurement of anything. It's just kind of like it's kind of this marketing thing to simplify things for you. But one manufacturer's 10 weight could be completely different to another manufacturer's 10 weight in terms of the actual CST. And a CST is a centiliter stroke, which is more of it's a measurement of time. So it's how long a set weight, a measurement weight takes to drop through the fluid. The thicker the fluid, the slower the weight falls at 2 different temperatures. So they do that at 40 degrees, 100 degrees, or is it 0 and 40? I can't remember. Anyway, look at the CST. It's a much more accurate way of figuring out what weight the fluid is. I don't know why I told you all that. I'm justifying using 10 weight rather than 5 weight, which they say to use. So I'll grab the 10 weight because I've got one open, and this is where hopefully you guys can see this. I can't really see what you're saying.
Oh, good.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So literally pour the 10 weight in. So you get to the top. Then what I would normally do is just squeeze the bladder just to let some bubbles out. Now we are going to hand bleed this with the syringe. I might even show you it with the Andriani bleed machine afterwards as well if we have time. That's quite cool to see it in operation. Gets a bit messy, this bit. So there's some bubbles coming out there, but I'm not going to be able to get them all at this stage. You just kind of want to fill the damper as much as you can. You can get a good meniscus on the top here as well, which is one of my favourite words. Cool. So you're now ready to put the damper back in. This is where you trap a lot of air, and it's why you have to use a vacuum machine. There's actually quite a big recess underneath this piston, and even if you've got the cylinder head all the way back, because it's upside down when you put it in, you will trap a lot of air. You could submerge it, I guess. So you could submerge the whole damper, but you'd have to buy a fish tank full of 10 weight, and it could be quite flipping expensive, and it would have to be a big fish tank. So you're better off just doing it this way. You don't really need to grease anything here. The 10 weight does all that for you. So just pop that in. You will see some of the fluid purge out. That's absolutely fine. And then nip the seal head up. There is a torque setting for this, and you'll need to use a crow's foot wrench to get the torque setting right. So just make sure that you're multiplying your torque setting right off your crow's foot. I haven't actually got mine with me at the moment, but you've also got to make sure that your crow's foot wrench is parallel to your wrench and you're not clicking around, because that gives you fake torque settings. And that's more important on these than anything else you will use a crow's foot wrench for, because these are so lightweight compared to anything else. So, cool, that's the damper semi-filled. We just need to bleed it now. So we flip it round. Nice. And you actually need to take this top part out, which unfortunately on camera is going to be pretty tricky to show you, but you'll have to bear with me on that one. It is in there. I'll just spin that around. It's a tiny little C-clip, and the sharper your pick at this point, the better. I'll try and pick a nice sharp one. Sure, this is thrilling TV for you. All right, there we go. Now, these usually go absolutely flying, so I can show you now how small it is. It's that little tiny thing there. So they go flying. So just hold on to those. You can't buy them either. You'd have to buy a whole damper adjuster assembly, which would be like 50 quid. So make sure you don't lose those. Once you've done that, you can grab the adjuster assembly out the top, give that a wriggle, and that will come straight out. So we can put that to one side. Now, unfortunately, at this point, you do need a special tool, so I've got a special tool here. This is a Fit RC2 bleed tool. This actually fits the Andriani machine. They are available aftermarket. You can get them from your Fox dealer, but they fit perfectly in the top of the RC2 damper. What they then allow you to do is put a basic syringe on. So for me, this one's threaded, so it's quite a nice setup that I've got there. Hopefully you can just about see that. So you can see already that it's quite nice and secure, and as I push, you'll see, as I push on the damper, just undo that a bit. you can see that it's pushing fluid up, and you can see bubbles, hopefully. Just coming out of the fluid there. You can also give the bladder a bit of a purge, get all the fluid out the air out. But this isn't a foolproof way of bleeding. Really, you do need to use that bleed machine. Some people would normally, what I'd recommend is actually doing this and then leaving the damper open, maybe going to do a lower leg service whilst you wait. So fit your lower leg seals, clean up the lower leg, and then come back, and you'll find that most of the air is just kind of purged out. So at this point, we're going to need to fill the damper a bit more. And it's quite a big damper, so it will take quite a big volume of fluid. And that's about there, I'd say. Cool. So once you're at that point, you can take your tooling out. Just get rid of that. That's a nice little trick as well. If you use an open syringe, you can actually hold the top and catch all the fluid. So you're left with an amount of fluid in the top there, and then it's literally a case of just either replacing that O-ring or greasing that O-ring on top of the adjuster assembly, and then just popping that back in to the fork, like so. And then you should see the bladder expand and retract. Now you want to listen for noises at this point. Now that is not as quiet as it was, and that's because there's still air in there somewhere. I would usually spend a little bit longer than that bleeding it through. If I was doing it as kind of as a full service at Plush, we would use this. So we would actually use our bleed machine, and we'd actually connect the damper up to our bleed machine, turn it on, and it would actually vacuum out all the air and then refill with fresh fluid. So, but I understand this is quite an investment, but I'm very glad we got it. It saves me time. It means I can go make a coffee whilst this bleeds. So, yeah, the Fit 4 damper is pretty much the same. Just the top cap is much smaller. So the way that this top cap comes off is quite a bit smaller. The circlips are quite a bit smaller. So sharp picks really help. One thing that can really help with these actually is hypodermic needles. So you might know about nitrogen. We use hypodermic needles to charge nitrogen. So for getting circlips out, you can buy some cheap needles and kind of, they're really handy for getting little circlips out. They're also really handy for helping you to swapped rear air cans. So you might have seen air cans that have stuck down. You can actually use a hypodermic needle, flatten the needle and sneak it up the inside of the air seal, and then you just hear it hiss, and you won't have to undo an air can that will go bang. But I'll go over that in rear shocks when we do that. I think that's about it for sort of the modern Fox damper and the modern Fox, the newest air spring. There is some more stuff coming from Fox. There's I think a twin tube fork damper coming, which is pretty cool. But I think in terms of their air spring, it's one of the best and most simple out there at the moment anyway. So I think they'll probably just carry on with that for a little while. So that's pretty much it, I think, that I can show you for 2018 Fox stuff, other than a lower leg service, which I'm sure you guys have all done before. So I won't show you that. There aren't really any extra tricks with the new seal, other than the fact that it's now a metal ring seal, so a non-flange seal. So you have to have a seal driver to actually put it in. So just bear that in mind. And a good fitting seal driver as well. So I think that's about it.
Brilliant.
I guess you guys have probably got some questions, so feel free to fire some questions at me.
So I'm just unmuting you, everyone, and thank you for that, Matt. That was really instructive and absolutely superb. So who wants to put their hand up? Who wants to ask a question first? Hey, Aidan.
Yeah. Anyone got a question?
I think, Hayden, you got a question for us, mate? Okay, I've unmuted you guys so you can speak. Someone just want to speak for a test. Hello, Massimo.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Oh, he's there. Yeah.
There it goes.
Yeah, I thought I lost audio.
Yeah, if you guys have got any questions at all, just let me know about anything that you've seen tonight or anything you'd like to see in future ones if you're coming along to the next ones.
Matt, it's Mal.
I'm sure.
Oh, go on.
Yeah. On the podcast you were talking about, I was interested in you talking about coil springs. Is there anything significantly different with the servicing for those? Is that
in a fork, it's even easier because you take the top cap off and the coil spring comes out, clean it, re-grease it, put it back in. There will be a coil negative spring underneath the piston. So once you've got the lower leg off, I know we took the negative air spring assembly out.
Yeah.
When you take this assembly out the bottom of a fork of a coil fork, there'll be a negative coil spring. So the only thing which I can show you actually. So this is a negative coil spring. So the only thing to look out for with that is that that's not snapped. They tend to snap, especially with downhill bikes where the wheels are really heavy and the tires are really heavy, and you come off a jump and you get a high-speed rebound hit, and the top-out springs tend to snap after a while. So that's the only thing I'd say to look out for. But in terms of servicing the damper, it's exactly the same for an air coil. The tune might be slightly different, but tuning is something it's a massive can of worms when it comes to tuning. But that's the only thing I would look out for with coil springs, is just make sure the negative coil spring isn't snapped.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, no worry.
Massimo, can we hear you yet? Massimo, we can't hear you. Do you want to text me any questions you've got? Because I'm sure you've got plenty. And you see there's a chat button at the bottom as well.
Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to plug my phone in before it dies. That would be a fail. There we go.
Can anybody hear me? I've got headphones on, but can you hear my audio?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, brilliant. I've got a quick question for you, Matt. I'm not speaking too loudly. When you talk about kind of regulating the positive and negative air, you said you had a couple go out of your shop with the trouble where it wasn't regulated. You'd put like a little bit of air back in the air can at the end, and then give it a couple pushes, and then put it back to the customer's kind of requirements, or how?
The procedure that I use for swapping air on most forks and shocks now is to go half pressure first. So if the customer's running 100 psi, go to 50 psi, swap the air, so push the fork through its travel until we hear a hiss, and then repeat that until the hiss disappears. When the hiss disappears, the pressure has equalized. Then I would go again. So I'd probably go then to full pressure. So it's kind of a two-stage thing. The forks that are the hardest to do that on, or the one fork that's hardest to do that on, is a Boss Idle, the downhill fork. It's a high pressure fork, so they run upwards of 180 psi in the fork. So even if you go to halfway, it's really hard to get it through its travel. So you have to kind of do those in quarters with Boss. You have to bring them up really slowly. And we do have it quite a lot with customers that haven't experienced an air swap procedure before. And like you were saying, yeah, we absolutely have people phone us up that say they've had their fork service with this, and it doesn't feel right. And it's purely because they can't get the fork into its travel enough to get it to swap, because there's 200 psi in it, and we haven't swapped it, which is why we've got our shock squashing machine. You know, it's literally just there to test the shocks and to swap rear shocks before they go out. Yeah. So that's quite important. But you can do that in the bike. As long as you've got the bike there, you can swap the air.
And the telltale is the hiss, yeah.
Yeah. Just wait for that that hiss. If they're not swapping air, or they've got a problem swapping air, it's usually because the negative air chamber's full of fluid. So that happens when forks aren't serviced that much, or they're overfilled with fluid. Like we were saying with the float fluid, if you use that float fluid, which traditionally everybody uses in a Fox air spring service, if you use that float fluid on the new NA2 air spring, you'll just fill the negative air spring up and it won't swap air.
The quad seal as well. If it fills with fluid, could the quad seal be corrupted as well or something, or just as a point?
If you use a fluid, the quad seal won't seal properly. It'll just hydroplane past it, and you'll have all sorts of crazy issues. So, especially with 20 weight gold. So I have had people use, because we sell a service kit online, so like a home service kit for most forks. So you can buy that for all kinds of forks from our website. But people have bought the wrong one, and then they've used gold fluid in an air spring with a quad seal, and it's just it just won't work. It'll just be a mess. So air spring setup and swapping of air springs is quite important.
So if you click on chat, Matt, at the bottom there's a question from Massimo. Can you see that, or I can read it out to you? He says, is there any starting point that you recommend for volume spacers that you prefer?
That's a really good question, actually. For a fork, yes. I would say from what I've experienced with all forks and setting up forks for lots and lots of different people now, even the lightest riders need some ramp support. So I would probably say at least one volume spacer in all forks. They're designed to take a volume spacer. There will be recommendations for different rider weights with volume spacers, but it very much comes down to what the rider wants out of that fork. No volume spacers will give you a fork that's super linear, so it will run through its travel quite quickly. And on a fork, that can be a bit of a problem, because usually when that happens, you're braking and your head angle dives, and then you go over bars, and it's just a bit of a nightmare. So even lightweight riders, I would run at least one volume spacer, and then go up from there dependent on what the customer wants. So for instance, if you're riding somewhere really bumpy, really rocky, sometimes worth pulling volume spacers out of the fork, because you don't want the fork to ramp too much. You're going to feel that through the bars. But if you're riding more kind of bike parks and berms, you're going to want more ramp in that fork. So I'd definitely say no volume spacers is really not giving you any kind of air spring performance at all, especially on a front fork. And actually, personally, I run an air front fork and a coil rear shock. That's the setup that I run because of that ability for the front end to ramp, which you don't get from a coil on a fork. So yeah, I would say at least one. Pikes generally 2 to 3 for most people. Fox 36 is the new NA2 air spring, generally around 2 to 3 for most people. Fox 40s can go up to anywhere 6, 7 volume spaces. They're really high volume air spring. So yeah, it's kind of personal preference, but at least one, I would say.
Cool, thank you, Matt. So Massimo, just type any more questions you've got on the chat button down below. So we've certainly, been a bit longer than we expected because it's been such an interesting subject and so much to go into. I see Frank's left us now. Has anyone else got any more questions before we wrap up? Okay. Well, that looks like the end of lesson 1, and obviously this was new for all of us. So, Matt, thank you very much for the, your lesson there. Guys, thank you.
No worries.
How's it been? Has it been a good learning experience for you guys? So Massimo says, thanks, everyone. Learned a lot.
Cool. Thanks, Massimo.
Yeah, I found that really helpful.
Cool.
Great.
Good.
Yeah, Matt, thank you very much. That was really good information.
Yeah, no worries. Well, hopefully we can get some more info to you guys. If you've got any suggestions of other things that you want to see in the next ones, if you join us, then just let Sean know, and I'll make sure that I try and cover the things you guys want to know. But yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do, guys, because this has been recording, so what I'm going to do is upload this to the private Facebook group that you're all part of, and you can rewatch this obviously at any time and fire questions on there as well. Anything that you come across at any time during your membership. And we're going to be continuing same time next week with Matt, and we're just going to be going through different brands of forks. So what we'll also do is publish a schedule for you. And then for March, we're going to be getting into the rear shocks as well. And we're going to have Alan Wetherill from Hope join us as well, looking at the Hope HB60 and some full suspension technology too. Cool. So thank you for joining us, guys. I'm going to stop recording now.